It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Dalton, the owner of Jersey Watch Sports podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a sports podcast based off of jerseys?
Well, a couple years ago, I guess it's been at least over two. I had a friend give me the idea because we were always talking about sports and really enjoying it. And he was like, "Yo, man, you should start a sports podcast." And I was like, "Okay, I'll think about it." And year or so went by. I didn't do anything about it. And really, last year, during the pandemic and everything, I started listening to a bunch of podcasts more. Um, and just really getting into like listening to sports on podcast. And then I got into jerseys some more than I already was at that point, because I had already had the Jersey Watch Instagram page set up where I would like post my collection and stuff. And I was like, maybe I should use this as kind of an outlet for news and just kind of to share. I was like, because there's really not a lot of outlets for that for people that enjoy sports uniforms. Um, in that way that I do. So what I ended up doing in August of last year, I was listening to, I believe it was an Atlanta Hawks podcast where this guy was doing pretty much the whole episode by himself. And I really hadn't heard anyone do that while podcasting. Most people have like a co-host or a guest every time or something like that. And I was like, well, if he can do it by himself, I could do one by myself. So what I ended up doing was creating Jersey Watch, and it pretty much went from there.
Can you talk about, of course, how you came up with the iconic name Jersey Watch Sports?
Uh, Jersey Watch Sports actually came about a bit later than the podcast. So when I first started, of course, I started everything as just like a place to post stuff on Instagram of my collection. I was Jersey Addiction. Um, then I came up with the name of the podcast, Jersey Watch. Then after that, I really wanted to change my Instagram to match kind of the podcast. So it was Jersey Watch by Jersey Watch. And I was like, it doesn't sound quite correct. So I ended up, doing some brainstorming. And that's when I kind of came up with Jersey Watch Sports and kind of was like, all right, this can be like not just a showcase collection, but really a point where we could share news about this, be a news outlet for something like that. And where I got the Jersey Watch from, I was actually, I believe it was last June or August before I created the podcast. Um, I'd been watching a lot of the old TV show Baywatch, and I at that point I'd been through like almost every season of Baywatch, and I was just like, you know what? Why don't I do something like Jersey Watch or something different? And I looked it up. There was nothing else really like it for what I was going to use it for, and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. It's like I'm going to use Baywatch as inspiration.
That's so amazing. How did you come up with the design of your logo?
Really, I've always been fascinated with logos. I'm currently a graphic design student, so it had definitely been on my mind. If I wanted something, I wanted to kind of make it myself. Basically, what I ended up doing was creating. Um, I knew kind of what I wanted. I got out, my note cards and stuff, and I was drawing stuff out. And I was like, I was like, because I really wasn't sure what looked good. But I was actually inspired by UNC Charlotte. Their typeface and font for their word mark is actually really unique. And what I did was I didn't use their font style or anything, but I came really close. Um, So that's where I got kind of the JW from. And then I was like, but it needs to say something. I was like, people won't know what it is if it just says JW. So then I was like, well, we'll put Jersey Watch Sports around it. And after playing with some fonts, I was like, that looks like a logo that could be like on a center court of like a basketball court or something. I was like, that ended up being my final product.
What are some of the things that you cover in your podcast, Jersey Watch Sports?
So when I first started the podcast, I really wanted to focus on, when I first came out with it, there was a bunch of new jerseys that had dropped from NFL and NBA and stuff like that. So I really wanted to take each episode and just kind of go over the details, because what I had noticed before starting the podcast is that there wasn't a podcast that really went over the details of jerseys and jersey related aesthetics and stuff like that. So what I did was, with each episode, I would, whatever jersey came out, like my first episode, I think, was on the Atlanta Hawks. I got the Atlanta Hawks thing. I fully read into all the details I could find on every like stitch and how the numbers were and what it represented, what the team wanted it to represent, and just really broke that down and just kind of reshared that with the audience. And that's kind of what I do with most of it. I end up, whether it be NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, just really breaking down each individual uniform, and also try to talk about sports in that, like current things happening in the world of sports. Like right now, it's of course the NBA playoffs. A couple months, well, not even a couple months ago, you got the stuff with NFL free agency and the NFL draft and different things like that.
Of course, when it comes down to the breakdowns of jerseys, where do you find most of your research, and how long does it take you to come up with the episodes?
It really just depends. Some jerseys, like obviously I go to, most time the team itself will place that information out so where we can hear it. But like I'll look on the team's website. I'll look on, like, for instance, the MLB City Connects Nike Diamond actually posts a lot of like the images and stuff like that. It's basically Nike's baseball page, but they're specifically tasked with, basically showing those jerseys as new Nike creations. So I'll go there and I'll look for any details. I'll look for other sites, because there are websites that do cover jersey related things. There's just not really a podcast for it until now. But I'll look at sportslogos.net. Chris Creamer has great articles on details for certain sports and sports jerseys. And of course, the individual team websites is mainly where I get my information from.
What is it like to cover the NBA City Edition jerseys and also the MLB like jerseys?
It's really fun. I love talking about jerseys, anything jersey related. Like my family's like, just like, can't believe he's talking about jerseys again. But like with the City Connect, with the City Edition, it was really fun. Really fun. I had a couple of my friends on. I broke them down in a previous episode, and then the later episode we went down and like ranked them, and basically just arguing back and forth, like, how dare you put that one like fifth out of all these other jerseys? Like that one looks trash and all this other stuff. And that one was probably that was one of the funnest ones I covered, because you just get to read all the details. Because especially with something like the City Edition or the City Connect with baseball, is that they're all about the details, because it's based on that city, that fan base, and what that team represents to that city. And you see it like with the Buzz City Connect for the Charlotte Hornets. I mean, they had, gold and mint in there. And one of the details of that was the gold was from Carolina, had one of the first gold rushes. And the mint color was from, like, Carolina had one of the first US mints in the nation. So it's like one of those, the little details in there that make it fun to cover. As far as the MLB City Connects, I think it's fun because it really just hasn't been done. I mean, there's nothing like it in baseball. Baseball is pretty traditional when it comes to their uniforms and their practices on certain things. So this is really, for me, I think it's great because I get to see a sport that I've seen be so by the book with their rules kind of loosen up a little bit and really embrace the fan base and kind of what the fan base feels is important to the team.
With ranking jerseys and stuff, do you talk a lot about the like WNWHL, the WNBA, and like soccer and stuff like that? The sports that not many people talk about when it comes to jerseys.
Not particularly. Just because there's so much content with those types of sports. Like I know on like sportslogos.net, for instance, had covered like different soccer uniforms and stuff like that. But me myself, I'm not as familiar with the soccer or the NWHL and stuff like that. So I don't particularly cover that just because I'm not as familiar with it yet. Um, so maybe I'll get to covering it one day when I do bring myself to be more familiar with it. I did briefly go over the WNBA ones just because I am a little bit more familiar with that. Um, but yeah, I mean, hopefully one day we'll get to where I can cover them all.
Of course, with the name being the Jersey Watch Sports, do you have any jerseys that like are your particular favorite jerseys that you maybe wear on your podcast or have behind you?
Uh, it varies. I wear most of the time if I'm doing like if I have a guest on or something like that, I'll put a jersey like right here or something. Um, One of my favorite jerseys is probably my 2012 LeBron Heat jersey. It's the alternate red one. It says Miami on the front. That's probably my favorite. Um, the one I'd probably enjoy hanging up behind me, I actually have a custom Jersey Watch baseball jersey. Um, but I just really don't wear it that often. I bet most time if I find myself wearing something, I'm representing, my favorite teams and stuff. I really don't wear it that often.
Of course, with the jerseys and stuff, speaking about LeBron James, what is your input on like him changing his number from the 23 to back to 6 when he was with Miami?
I'm actually excited about it. I have been a LeBron fan for pretty much since I got into basketball. Um, and when he first went to the Cavs, he took a poll, I believe it was on his Twitter or something like that. And he let the fans pretty much decide if he was going to wear number 6 or number 23. And of course, I voted for number 6 because when I got into basketball, he was with the Heat. So I was like, yeah, he's got to wear 6. He's got to wear 6. And he ended up going back to 23, um, which I have all those Cavs jerseys now in 23. But now he's going back to 6. And a lot of people thought or speculated that he would go back to 6 when he went to the Lakers the first time. I was hoping he would. Of course, he did not. And now he is changing his number. So, I mean, from a buyer perspective, who's already bought those Lakers jerseys with 23, I am sad. Uh, but from the standpoint of me actually wanting him to wear 6, I'm pretty excited about it.
Of course, when it comes to that, do you talk about on your jersey watch? Do you talk about where players, like even in the NFL now, they're saying where some players can have single digit numbers? Do you talk about the takes of like, yes, they could, or no, I feel like they shouldn't because people like us buy the jerseys and then it'll be worth it.
Well, I did talk about that on an episode. I had my NFL guy on um, to go over that with me, and I kind of broke it down as to what, positions were being allowed to change to different numbers and such. Um, Basically, from what I got from him, because he played football, and of course, so from a football player's perspective, I can see why some of the players positionally would be affected because of course certain positions wear certain digit numbers, and like Tom Brady was like how was all upset about it. And that's because, for 20 years or so, he's been so used to, all right, that's how I know that guy's out of position, is because he's wearing that number over here. Or, if I throw to him, I know he's going to have a double digit number on, or a number in the 20s or 30s on. That's how he can, that's how he visualizes the game, and has for a long time. But from a younger perspective, for me, I mean, I don't really look at football by the numbers. And I think that's because I haven't played it. Like, I love watching football, but with me not having that player perspective on the jerseys affecting, like, to tell if someone's out of position, or, where someone's going to be on the field, I can see how that would be difficult. But from a fan's perspective, I really don't have a problem with it. I think it's great. I do wish that they would give like a year notice, so like where it would not go into effect this year but next year, especially just so they can get rid of the rest of their stock, or just kind of announce it, so players are like, okay, we're not going to buy this number yet, we'll wait till you come out with your new number. Because I mean, I know like Fanatics and other places like that do like jersey assurance, like if a player were to change the number or so, but that really only applies within like the first 90 days, or it might be 120 days. But I mean, I would be upset if Christian McCaffrey went back to his number 5, because I already have 2 jerseys with number 22 on it. So, I mean, I kind of see it from all sides here, where it can be difficult and irritating, but I mean, overall, I'm for it.
What is your input on players that, like, for example, get traded, and, like, let's say, for example, with Tom Brady, okay, he goes from the Patriots to the Buccaneers, where maybe his number of 12, somebody had it, so then he had it to like kind of buy it off of them. What is your input on that?
I mean, I get it. Like I don't think a player should be entitled to a number just because he shows up. So like you said, like you mentioned Tom Brady. Let's say the number 12 was taken. He goes in, he's like, I'm Tom Brady, I want the number 12. I think that's a bit arrogant, and a bit unnecessary. I think the way they do it with, buying it off a player, or, just, asking for it, seeing what they can do, it's much more reasonable, and it makes the player come off really not as selfish. But you also got to understand, like, from the other player's perspective, if that player didn't want to give up 12, that's the number they had since they were a kid. They grew up with it. They played it. They wore it in high school. They wore it in college. I can see how that would be difficult. But if like, I wear the number 13 when I play sports. I love it. It's my number. Always worn it. If I was in that position where I could not have my number 13, I would see if I could get the number 13 for a price or whatever it may be, probably as if Tom would have done. But at the end of the day, if the person really doesn't want to give it up, that's their choice. I don't think anybody can be super upset about that. The same way Tom has a connection to that number, that guy may have had just a strong connection with that number. It may not have been attached to a couple of Super Bowls, but it still may have just as much meaning to him.
What are some of your favorite memories and moments of your podcast, Jersey Watch Sports?
Ooh, yeah, that's a hard one. I don't know. I would say just really getting to know like my different guests that I've had on. Those have been great memories. Like, you get to meet, like, you come in contact with all these different people that enjoy the same thing, whether it be jerseys or just sports in general. And it's really fun to see and, connect with those people. But it's also really fun to, connect, with the jerseys itself, to dig into the content. It is a lot of content. The most fun I've had covering content, probably the NHL reverse retros. Those were probably the most fun, because basically I had zero, like, I didn't have like hardly any hockey knowledge before I started my podcast, as far as like different rules, the jerseys, anything like that. I just really didn't have that knowledge. And now that I basically had to learn that knowledge as I was going over these jerseys. I'm like, I can't talk about something I don't know. It's like, because that I would not cover anything on the podcast I was not knowledgeable about, at least to a certain extent. So with the hockey jerseys, I really had to dig in and just do like a study on hockey and then do a study on the jerseys and kind of look, because with the reverse retros, they're throwbacks to the past. So you also have to understand those past uniforms they're throwing back to and what those, eras of that hockey team represent to the team now and why they're reusing it. So the hockey, the NHL reverse retro is probably the most fun.
What are some of your future plans with the Jersey Watch Sports?
Currently, of course, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on Twitter. My future plans, I'm really hoping to grow the TikTok page. As far as the podcast goes, I don't really post any of the podcast content to the TikTok. I'm looking to do that in the near future. I'm also looking to add a video element to the podcast, because right now jerseys are a very visual thing, and the podcast is currently not a visual thing. So I'm looking at some point, I don't know how soon, but hopefully soon, to add a visual element, whether that be, bringing it to YouTube, something visual that people can actually see.
What is something that you learned now that you didn't know before starting a podcast talking about jerseys?
I mean, honestly, like, whether it be just setting up a podcast, whether it be connecting with others to really just kind of get the knowledge, I didn't realize how much time would go into it. Like, I spread out things. So like if I did notes on a Wednesday and I had a podcast coming out on a Friday, I'd do some on Wednesday, some on Thursday, and then I'd record Thursday also, for it to come out Friday. That way I had time to, edit anything or just kind of go over anything that I didn't feel like fit or needed to be taken out, stuff like that. But also just the setup process. I knew nothing about the process of setting up a podcast. When I got started, I went in and I did about a month of research on different podcasting platforms and different things like that, just trying to really know what I'm getting myself into before I do this. Cause I'm like, if I, some of them, it's a large commitment money wise, depending on how you set up your podcast. And I was like, I don't want to put myself in that situation if it bombs to be tied in like that. So yeah, just really kind of the setup and just really understanding how long it takes to make a podcast.
What advice would you give somebody looking to start their own podcast, particularly in jerseys talking?
Do your research. I'm all for with this. There's really no players out there in the jersey podcast market, really. So, I mean, I'm all for other people jumping in and putting their own take on it, especially with jerseys. Because, like I said, I mean, I looked for content and I wanted that content. I couldn't find it. I mean, I always, people look for different sports content. They look out, they can't find it. If they want to start it, I would say go for it. Just make sure you do your research and you're not, misquoting anything or stealing somebody else's information. If you use somebody's information, quote them on it.
That's wonderful advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast at on social media and podcast platforms?
So we're pretty much available on all podcast platforms. You can go to jerseywatchsports.com and listen on there. For Instagram and Twitter, we're at _JerseyWatch, and on TikTok, we're at JerseyWatch. But you can pretty much find us anywhere. We're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Anchor, Wave, but just search Jersey Watch Podcast and we'll be there.
Thank you again, Dalton, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with Jersey Watch Sports Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck.
It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.